I was being swallowed by my past, but I decided to turn it around. This is my story. I don't know exactly how I started believing things could get better, but I can tell you there was a precise moment when I realized I couldn't go on the way I was. I was 17 and my life was a mess. I'd always been the invisible brother to my family. Diego, my older brother, was always the darling. He had everything: attention, love, respect. Me, I was always just the guy who was there, without much value. Grew up hearing that I wasn't good enough, that my way wasn't enough, that my presence was more of an obligation than a choice. My parents' fights were the backdrop to my life. But something happened, and I don't know exactly how, but one day everything exploded. I couldn't take the pressure of living in a home that felt more like a war zone. After one of those fights, when I saw my parents separating again, something inside me broke. I no longer had the strength to stay there. I needed to get out. I needed to breathe, but I didn't know where to go. I moved in with Diego. He didn't want to, but I couldn't stay home either. He and my sister-in-law, Christina, lived together, and I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I had no choice. The idea of moving there seemed good at first, but I soon realized things wouldn't be any different. Diego was as distant from me as he'd ever been, and Christina, well, she never really liked me. It was like I was a burden, someone she hadn't asked to be there. When I got there, it seemed like my life was only getting worse. Diego was too busy with his own life, and Christina always seemed irritated. I was there, like an intruder, trying to fit in where no one wanted me. My niece, Annalise, poor thing, just looked at me like someone who had invaded her space. It was a strange feeling, being there and, at the same time, completely invisible. I felt exhausted, not just physically but mentally. Every day was a struggle. I woke up in the morning hoping things would get better, but deep down I knew nothing would change. I felt the weight of rejection in Christina's eyes and Diego's indifference. And Annalise, well, she was just a child, but she seemed to already know enough to treat me like a stranger. The worst part was, I didn't know how to change that. It was one day, in the midst of all that chaos, that something inside me snapped. I was sitting in the living room, listening to Diego and Christina discuss some problem they had, and something just snapped inside me. I was tired of being the nobody. I was tired of always seeing myself as the guy who wasn't good enough, the younger brother who never got his place in the sun. That's when I looked at them and thought, it's not going to be like this. I'm not going to live like this. That thought made me get up from my chair and leave the room. I went to my room and closed the door. I needed some time alone to try to organize my mind. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the wall, but in that moment I made a promise to myself. I would change. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but I knew I could no longer be the guy who accepted crumbs. I would get back on my feet, even if it was difficult, even if it took time. Over the next few days, I began to withdraw a little more. Not aggressively, but quietly. I began to observe more, to pay attention to what was happening around me. I realized how broken the relationships within that house were. I wasn't the only one with problems. Diego, despite everything, had his own battles, and Christina, well, she was carrying a pain I wasn't sure I could understand. Annalise, on the other hand, was just a child, but perhaps she was the most sensible of them all. I stopped trying to please. No, not in a rude way, but I began to understand that pleasing everyone had never worked. Instead, I began to focus on myself. I realized that if I didn't look after myself, no one else would. I decided I wouldn't wait for Diego to save me or for Christina to accept me. I was going to save myself. I was going to be the Lorenzo who had always been there, but who had never been given the chance to exist. It wasn't easy, much less quick, but something started to change. I stopped feeling so small. Of course, I was still very afraid, very embarrassed to show myself, but every day I took a step forward. At first, they were small victories. Sometimes, just talking to Christina without her treating me like a stranger. was already an achievement. I started being more present, but in a healthy way, without forcing things. I learned to respect my own space and the space of others. Diego somehow started to look at me differently. I don't know if it was because he saw I was trying, or if it was because he was also going through his own struggles, but he started talking to me more. He wasn't the older brother I always wanted, but it was something. It was a start. I understood that we often only get what we give. If I wanted a relationship with him, I needed to start building my own, even if he wasn't willing at first. Things with Christina didn't improve immediately, but I stopped expecting her to be different. She was who she was, and I was who I was. So I started respecting her boundaries more. When I saw she was willing to talk to me, I was there. If she wasn't, I stayed silent, but without hiding. The key was understanding that I couldn't change others, but I could change my reaction to everything. The hardest part was with Annalise. How to explain to a child what was happening, how to create a bond with someone so small and so pure, without forcing a friendship that didn't exist. But little by little, things began to happen naturally. I tried to play with her when she was willing, respected her when she wasn't. It was a gradual relationship, unhurried, unpressured, and little by little, she loosened up, and over time, we began to understand each other. I can't say my life is perfect now, far from it. But that day, that moment when I decided I was no longer going to be the invisible Lorenzo, that moment was the beginning of everything. Today, I still struggle, still face my fears and insecurities, but I know I'm on the right path. The Lorenzo who arrived here with all the pain, all the anger, and all the sadness is no longer the same. I'm learning to live for myself, and that's already a great victory. Maybe one day things will get better. Maybe I'll have the family I've always wanted, or maybe I'll continue to fight for my own victories. But one thing is certain, I'm no longer the same boy who walked into that house not knowing who he was. I learned to respect myself, to not depend on others to feel whole. And in the end, that was the biggest step of my life. The hardest part of this whole process was learning to trust again, trusting people, trusting myself. I grew up believing that no one would truly be there for me, that everyone would abandon me when things got tough. So when I looked at Diego, Christina, even Annalise, I couldn't see anyone I could truly depend on. But over time, I realized that trust isn't built overnight. It's gradual, made up of small actions, and little by little, people begin to show you who they truly are. There were still days when I wanted to run away, when I thought maybe life had dealt me a punishment I couldn't escape. But over time, I learned to deal with it. I couldn't control what had happened in the past, but I could control what I did with what I had now. And even though it seemed small, each step I took made me stronger. I learned to look at my own wounds and understand them, without being ashamed of who I was or what I had been through. Sometimes I looked at myself and no longer recognized that Lorenzo, the insecure, dull boy, was giving way to someone stronger, more confident. This didn't happen magically. It was a slow process of mistakes and successes, of falling and getting up. But every time I fell, I got up faster, because I knew that each time I got up, I was closer to the person I wanted to be. I was no longer afraid of making mistakes, not anymore. That's when I realized I no longer needed anyone's validation. For so long, I lived in other people's shadows. I lived seeking acceptance, waiting for love and attention from others. But I learned that to be happy, I didn't need that. I needed to love myself first. And that was one of the biggest challenges I faced. Accepting who I was, with all my flaws and failings. But when I finally did, everything around me began to change. I allowed myself to make mistakes. I allowed myself to be imperfect. That's not to say I don't have difficult days, because I do, but I've learned to be kinder to myself. I know my journey is far from over, but I'm no longer the same person. I am Lorenzo, with my own qualities, my own flaws, and above all, with the desire to continue growing, and that in itself is a great achievement. My relationship with Diego isn't perfect yet, far from it. But something changed. He started to see me differently, as someone he could count on. It wasn't a magical transformation, but a process of small changes, of dialogues that previously seemed impossible. And Christina, well, she's still hard to understand, but today I know she's trying too. Family, in some ways, is a constant work. But now, instead of feeling alienated, I feel like I'm part of it. The most important thing of all was realizing that I don't need to wait for anyone to save me. I can do it myself. I am the key to my own change. This was the greatest lesson of my life, that I can be the person I want to be, regardless of what happens around me. When I looked within myself and stopped looking outside for what was missing, that's when everything began to change. I was the change I needed, and that was more powerful than anything I've ever experienced. Annalise, as difficult as it was, ended up becoming a reflection of the change I was experiencing. She began to see me differently. Instead of looking at me with suspicion, as she had before, she began to seek me out, confiding in me her little stories. It wasn't easy, but every smile from her gave me the strength to carry on. She showed me that even the most difficult relationships can have a turning point. Sometimes all you need is to take the first step. Life wasn't meant to be easy. I learned this the hard way. Each challenge shaped me and at the same time taught me to be stronger. There are no magic formulas to overcome what you've experienced. There is no turning point where everything is resolved. But yes, there is a moment when you decide to fight. And once you do, everything starts to fall into place, albeit slowly, albeit imperfectly. I'm not a hero. I don't have an incredible, perfect story of overcoming adversity. I'm just someone who, after a long time of feeling small, decided they wanted more for themselves. The journey isn't over, but today, looking back, I see that the path I've taken has made me stronger. I can't control what happens around me, but I can control who I am, and that, in itself, is a big step. When I look back on my story, I see how much I've grown. It's not about how much life has made me suffer, but about how much I've learned to overcome. I am the sum total of all my experiences, my fears, my failures, but also my victories. I am the person I've gradually become, and I'm proud of that. It may seem simple, but it's a truth I never imagined I'd understand. Life will test me more often. It will make me question many things and challenge me in ways I don't yet understand. But today, I'm prepared to face these challenges, not because I'm immune to fear or pain, but because I now know I can handle them. I know I can move forward, even when things don't seem easy. I've learned that I can trust myself, and that's the greatest gift I could give myself. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that. Right now, I'm ready for anything. I'm ready for life, for challenges, for achievements. I know I'll make mistakes, I'll fall, but I also know I'll get back up. Because above all, what I've learned is that life isn't about avoiding mistakes, but about learning from them. And that's how we move forward. Ultimately, what matters most is what we do with our pain. It doesn't define us, but it shapes us. I'm no longer the same Lorenzo who entered that house. Today, I'm someone who, despite everything, chose to be happy. I chose to be better day after day, even if things don't always go as planned. And that's how I'll continue, growing, making mistakes, learning, and above all, living. And for you reading this right now, know that I understand what you're feeling. I know what it's like to feel lost, invisible, and unsure of what to do. But trust me, you can overcome this. What you need is to believe in yourself, even when no one else does, because change starts with you. And in the end, it will be your strength that will take you where you deserve to be.